The dust had been a living thing for 3 months, a pale brown fog that blurred the line between the sky and the high desert. It coated the tongues of Wyatt's cattle, stole the green from the cottonwoods, and settled in the deep lines around his own eyes. He lived in a world of silence, broken only by wind and the low complaint of a thirsty herd. He preferred it that way. The high mesa near the Colorado and New Mexico border was a good place to be forgotten. It was late August, 1883. The air was hot, still, and heavy with a promise of violence. A storm was building in the west, the clouds piling up in shades of bruised purple and sick yellow. Wyatt was mending a fence line 3 miles from his cabin, his hands working the wire with practiced, angry efficiency. The quiet was what he had paid for, and he guarded it fiercely. That was when he heard it, not the storm, not yet. This was the sound of people. It was a sharp crack, followed by a high, splintering noise, and then a chorus of mismatched shouting. It came from the direction of the stage road, still 2 miles distant. Wyatt did not move for a full minute. His first instinct, sharp and immediate, was to ignore it. Trouble on the road was not his trouble. The road brought nothing but plague, mail, whiskey, and memory. He went on wrapping the wire, his jaws set, but the shouting turned to a wail. One high, thin note of panic that cut through the heavy air. He cursed, a low sound lost in the wind. He dropped the wire. People were an infection. He had built his life on avoiding them. Yet, he found himself untying his horse, mounting up, and riding toward the sound, his face set in a grim mask of resentment. He found them at the bottom of a shallow arroyo, the dry creek bed that crossed the road. The coach, a big Concord, was canted over at a sickening angle. Its left rear wheel was gone, shattered into a dozen pieces. The axle dug deep into the baked earth. The driver was sitting on the ground, holding his head. The horses, blessedly, seemed unhurt, tangled in their harness but quiet. The passengers were spilled out onto the dust. There were 4 of them. A portly man in a sweat-stained suit was fanning himself with his hat, his face the color of bad cheese. A severe-looking older woman in black bombazine sat on her trunk, clutching a reticule as if it were the only solid thing left in the world. A young man, pale and thin in a preacher's collar, was trying to comfort the driver. And then there was the girl. She was the last one to climb out, pushing her way through the tilted door. She was young, maybe 20. Maybe less. She wore a dress of cheap, bright blue satin, the kind of thing a woman might wear to a dance hall in St. Louis, not to the high desert. It was already dark with sweat and streaked with the pale dust. She stepped onto the ground, looked at the broken wheel, and let out a laugh. It was not a happy sound. It was brittle, sharp, and entirely out of place. "Well," she said, her voice carrying in the heavy air, "I suppose this means we won't be in Santa Fe by supper." The portly man, Mr. Abernathy, shot her a venomous look. "This is no time for jests. Young woman, we are stranded." "We are at that," she said, adjusting the bodice of her dress with a tug. She looked around, her eyes bright and quick, taking in the landscape, the other passengers, and finally, Wyatt. He had reined in his horse on the bank of the arroyo, hidden by a stand of juniper. He had been watching. He did not like being seen. He urged his horse forward, stopping a few yards from the wreck. The driver looked up, his eyes wide with relief. "Thank God. Sir, we've had a mishap, a terrible mishap." Wyatt said nothing. He dismounted, his movements economical. He walked to the back of the coach and looked at the axle. It was not just broken. It was buried. This coach was not moving. Not today. "Storm's coming," Wyatt said. His voice was rough from disuse, like stones grinding together. The preacher looked up at the sky. "Surely, sir, it will pass. The Lord provides." Wyatt looked at the yellow-green light that was starting to paint the clouds. "He's providing a gully washer. This arroyo will be 10 feet deep in water by sunset." That set them to panicking. Mrs. Gable, the woman in black, stood up. "This is unacceptable. Driver, you must fix this. We paid our passage." The driver just groaned. It was the girl. "Clara, who spoke to Wyatt. She had walked right up to him, her head tilted. She had a heart-shaped face that was too thin, and her hair, a dark brown, was coming loose from its pins. "And you, mister?" she asked. "Are you the welcoming committee?" Wyatt looked at her. Her eyes were bold. He hated bold women. They reminded him of traps. "My ranch is 2 miles north. You can stay there, or you can stay here." He turned and started walking back to his horse. 2 miles. "Mister," Abernathy wheezed, clutching his chest. "In this heat? It's an outrage." "Suit yourself," Wyatt said, not looking back. "The walk will be worse in the rain." That got them moving. He set a pace that was deliberately too fast for the salesman and just slow enough for the woman. He carried Mrs. Gable's trunk on his shoulder, the weight a familiar comfort. The girl, Clara, darted back and forth like a nervous bird. She had no baggage, he noted, just the clothes she stood in and a small, beaded purse. She was, he decided, the most irritating human being he had ever met. She filled his precious silence with noise. "My goodness, is that a hawk?" she'd ask, pointing. "It looks so free up there. I suppose it doesn't have to worry about breaking an axle. Or its neck." She tried to engage the others. "Mrs. Gable, that is a lovely shawl. Does it keep the dust out, or just the conversation?" Mrs. Gable would sniff and turn her head. "Brother Thomas," she said to the young preacher, who was stumbling over the rocks. "You look pale. Are you praying for deliverance, or just for a decent pair of boots?" Brother Thomas blushed a furious red and muttered something about the impudence of women. She even tried with Wyatt. She fell into step beside him, which was difficult, as he had a longer stride. "You don't talk much, do you?" she asked. He kept walking. "That's all right. I talk enough for 10. Back in the city, people said I had a tongue that could clip a hedge. But what do they know? They were mostly dullards. Are you a dullard, mister?" He stopped. They were on the crest of a ridge. His cabin was visible below, a solid, lonely shape of pine and stone. "That's the house," he said. "Don't waste your breath. You'll need it." She looked at him, and for a second, the smile faltered. The corners of her mouth tightened, but then it was back, bright and false. "Oh, I have breath to spare. It's about the only thing I do." His house was one large room, a loft for sleeping, and a lean-to kitchen. It was obsessively clean and brutally simple. A fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, and a long cot. A rifle rack by the door held 3 guns, all meticulously oiled. The passengers spilled inside, bringing the smell of dust and sweat with them. They looked around at the sparse furnishings with open disappointment. "It's rustic, mister," Abernathy managed. "It's clean," Wyatt snapped. He pointed to the cot. "Mrs. Gable, the rest of you find a spot on the floor." As if on cue, the sky broke. The first drops were as big as coins, kicking up dust on the porch. Within minutes, it was a roar. A solid wall of water hit the wooden shingles, and the wind began to howl. The temperature dropped 20 degrees. Mrs. Gable let out a small shriek as a crack of thunder shook the very foundations of the cabin. Clara, however, walked to the small window. She watched the rain lash the ground, turning the dust to a thick, running mud. Her reflection stared back at her, a pale ghost in the glass. "Well," she whispered, more to herself than anyone. "That's that." Wyatt had lit the stove. The sudden warmth, mixed with the cold air, made the room feel clammy. He put a pot of coffee on to boil. He had planned on salt pork and beans for supper. He supposed he would have to share. The thought soured his stomach. He felt the girl's eyes on him. He turned. She was watching him. That same calculating look she'd had at the wreck. "You're not used to company, are you?" she asked, her voice low. He turned back to the stove. The spark was not attraction. It was not desire. It was the feeling of a splinter, a small, sharp piece of the outside world that had managed to get under his skin. He wanted her gone. He wanted all of them gone. An hour later, As the rain turned to hail, there was a heavy pounding on the door. Wyatt opened it. It was Jed Miller, his closest neighbor, who lived 5 miles down the valley. Jed was a good man, which meant he left Wyatt alone. He was soaked to the bone, his face grim. Behind him, his wife Mary sat in their buckboard wagon, a canvas sheet pulled over her head. "Wyatt!" Jed shouted over the storm. "Saw the wreck from the ridge. Figured they'd be with you. I can take them to the settlement. Mrs. Pierce at the boarding house has room." The relief Wyatt felt was so sudden and powerful, it almost made him dizzy. "Get your things," he said to the passengers. There was a scramble. "Mr." Abernathy practically kissed Jed's hand. "Mrs." Gable gathered her trunk, her face a mask of strained gratitude. Brother Thomas was already at the door, his small bag clutched in his hand. Clara stood up. She had put her hair back in order, though it was still damp. She smoothed the front of her cheap dress. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice polite. "That is most kind." Jed Miller looked at her. He stopped, his face, open and friendly a moment ago, clouded with discomfort. He looked at his wife in the wagon, then back at Wyatt, then at Clara. "Ah," Jed said. "Well, the thing is, Miss Clara," she supplied, her smile tightening. "Miss Clara, the thing is, Mrs. Pierce, she's got 3 rooms. Mr. Abernathy can take 1, Mrs. Gable the other, and Brother Thomas, well, he can bunk with my boy." "That sounds perfect," Clara said, though the brightness in her eyes had dimmed. "Jed," Wyatt said, his voice flat. He knew this dance. He saw where it was going. Jed wouldn't meet his eyes. "Wyatt, Mrs. Pierce, she's particular. She runs a clean house. And I am unclean." Clara's voice was sharp now, all the music gone. Brother Thomas stepped forward, his pale face slick with rain. He looked miserable. "Miss Clara, perhaps it is best. Your behavior on the coach, it was noted. You were overly familiar." "I was talking, brother," she snapped. "Is that a sin now?" "It was the nature of the talk," he mumbled, turning away. "And we heard in Albuquerque. Your reputation." The word hung in the air. Reputation. A thing as heavy and as real as a stone. "Mrs." Gable pulled her shawl tighter and sniffed, as if Clara had just released a bad smell into the room. "Mr." Abernathy was already halfway to the wagon, eager to escape the confrontation. Jed looked helpless. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I truly am. But Mrs. Pierce won't have it. She says she's heard of you. She won't have your kind in her house. It's a respectable place." Clara's face went completely blank. It was, Wyatt thought, more terrifying than her anger. The light just went out. She was no longer a sharp-tongued girl. She was just a shell. "I see," she said. She turned, not to Jed, but to Wyatt. He was her last hope. He could see it in the last dying ember in her eyes. She expected him to say something, to vouch for her, to offer. Wyatt turned his back. He walked to the stove and picked up the coffee pot. He poured himself a cup. He could feel her gaze on his back, a physical weight. He did not move. He was a reclusive man. This was not his business. He had offered shelter from a storm. The storm was being handled by others. The silence stretched. The hail hammered the roof. Finally, Jed cleared his throat. "Come on, then. Let's get you folks settled." Wyatt heard the door close. He heard the wagon rattle away. Its sound quickly swallowed by the storm. He stood in his cabin. It was silent again. Just him, the storm, and the smell of wet wool and cheap perfume the girl had left behind. He took a long drink of the coffee. It was bitter, just how he liked it. He had his silence back. He felt nothing. He told himself he felt nothing. He slept badly. The cot felt too soft, the room too empty. The storm raged all night, and he lay awake, listening to the wind tear at the corners of his house. He kept thinking of the way the light had gone out of her eyes. It was a look he had seen before, in saloon halls and on battlefields. It was the look of a creature that knew the trap was closing. He rose before dawn. As was his habit, the storm had broken, leaving the world scoured clean. The air was cold and sharp, smelling of pine and wet earth. He built a fire, made his coffee, and strapped on his gun belt. His first chore was always the stock. The storm would have spooked the horses. He pulled on his coat and stepped out onto the porch. The mud was ankle deep, a thick, red soup. The sky was a pale, clear gray. He walked to the barn, his boots making sucking sounds in the mud. He slid the heavy wooden door open. The familiar smell of hay, manure, and horse washed over him. He started toward the stalls. A small sound made him pause. A rustle. From the tack room, he stopped. His hand went to the gun on his hip. He was not a man who liked surprises. "Who's there?" he called, his voice a low growl. There was no answer, just another rustle. He walked to the tack room, a small space where he kept his saddles and feed. He pushed the door open. She was there. She was not sleeping. She was huddled on a pile of old burlap sacks, her arms wrapped around her knees, trying to make herself small. Her blue dress was dark, soaked through and covered in mud and bits of hay. She was shivering, a deep, rattling tremor that shook her whole body. He stared. The anger that flashed through him was hot and pure, a trespass. She had invaded his last refuge. "Get up," he said. His voice was not kind. She did not jump. She uncurled slowly, painfully, like an old woman. The sharp girl from yesterday was gone. This was a stray dog, beaten and wary. "I told you to go with them," he said. "They wouldn't take me," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. "I had nowhere to go." "The settlement. They wouldn't. So you came here. You hid in my barn." "It was cold," she said, as if that explained everything. "Get out," he said. "I want you gone. The settlement is that way. You can walk. They'll find you a spot on the next coach." She nodded. She seemed to gather her last bit of strength. She pushed herself to her feet, and she winced. A sharp, involuntary hiss of pain. She tried to put her weight on her right foot and nearly fell. She braced herself against the wall. Wyatt looked down. Her shoes. They were cheap city slippers, made of thin satin. They were not shoes. Not really. They were decorations, and they were destroyed. The soles had been torn completely off. The burlap sacks she had been sitting on were stained, not just with mud. There were dark, rusty spots of dried blood. He looked at her feet. She had tried to wrap them in rags, bits of torn cloth from her petticoat. The rags were soaked through with blood. The 2-mile walk from the arroyo, over sharp rock and cactus spine, had shredded them. Then a night in the cold, wet barn. He looked at her feet, and then at her face. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the ground, her jaw clenched, waiting for him to yell at her again, to drag her out. She was bracing for the final blow. The silence in the barn was absolute, broken only by the sound of her chattering teeth. Wyatt looked at her bloody feet for a long time. The splinter under his skin twisted. This was not a woman. This was a wound. He turned. He did not say a word. He walked out of the barn, leaving the door open. He went back to the house. The fire was still going. He threw another log on it. He filled the big kettle with water and put it on the stove. He went to the porch and brought in the metal basin he used for washing. He went to a small wooden box on the shelf, the one he had not opened in years. He took out a roll of clean linen bandage and a small, dark jar of carbolic salve. He set it all on the kitchen table. She appeared in the doorway, a shadow against the bright morning light. She was still shivering. She looked at the fire, then at him. He did not look at her. He pointed at the chair. "Sit." She hesitated, then did as she was told, moving with stiff, painful steps. He poured the hot water into the basin. Steam rose in the cold air. He knelt. He did not ask permission. He grabbed her left ankle. His hand was rough, calloused, and large. It swallowed her ankle whole. She flinched, but did not pull away. He lifted her foot and plunged it into the hot water. She cried out, a sharp, strangled sound. The water turned pink, then brown. As the mud and blood dissolved, he worked in silence. He was methodical. He scrubbed the dirt away, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man of his size. The wounds were deep, nasty, jagged cuts and a dozen black-purple puncture wounds from thorns. She said nothing. She just watched the top of his head, her hands gripping the edge of the chair so hard her knuckles were white. When he was satisfied, he lifted her foot out, dried it, and began to apply the salve. It stung, and she hissed again, but she did not move. He wrapped the foot tightly, from toe to ankle, in the clean linen. He dropped the wrapped foot and reached for the other one. He repeated the process. The water in the basin was now a dark, ugly red. "Why were you in the barn?" he asked, his voice low, not looking up from his work. "They wouldn't take me," she said. Her voice was flat. "Dead. Mrs. Pierce. She said she doesn't house my kind." "What kind is that?" he asked, tying off the second bandage. "The kind that talks too much. The kind that doesn't have baggage. The kind that arrives with a preacher who warns people about her." He stood up. He took the basin and threw the bloody water out the back door. He washed his hands at the pump, scrubbing them raw. He turned back to her. She was sitting in his chair, her feet looking like two white clubs on the floor. She looked impossibly small. He wanted her gone. He needed his silence. He had built a fortress here, and she had breached it, but he could not, in good conscience, send her to walk on those feet. Not today. He poured a cup of coffee, black. He slid it across the table. She picked it up with both hands, lifting it to her lips, letting the steam warm her face. He stared out the window. The creek was a raging brown torrent. The road was gone, washed away into a sea of red mud. "Road's washed out," he said. "Creek's up. Nothing is moving for at least 2 days." She sipped the coffee. It was hot, and it burned. She closed her eyes. He finally looked at her. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt, but her eyes were open, watching him. "You can stay," he said. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "For a day. Just a day." She nodded, her gaze not leaving his. "Until you can walk," he finished. "Then you move on." She drank her coffee. She did not say thank you. He did not expect her to. The first day passed in a strained, wet silence. The second day, the creek was still a torrent, the color of coffee and clay, and the road was nothing but a memory of mud. Wyatt rose at 4, as he always did, and found Clara asleep in his chair by the cold hearth, her bandaged feet propped on a stool. He had taken the cot in the loft, and the small betrayal of his routine made his mood even fouler. He made noise. He slammed the kettle onto the stove, dropped wood into the firebox, scraped his boots on the stone. She woke with a start, her eyes wide and unfocused, a small, frightened sound in her throat. When she saw him, the fear was replaced by that same wary blankness. "I need to check the north fence line," he said, not looking at her. "The storm will have taken it down." He pulled a slab of bacon from the larder. "There's flour in the bin. Make yourself useful. Or don't." He left. He was gone for 8 hours. He rode hard, pushed himself and his horse, found the fence, and mended it with a cold, precise anger. He worked through the gnawing hunger in his belly, welcoming the pain. He was angry that she was still there. He was angrier that he had not been able to force her out into the mud. He was angrier still at the image of her shredded feet. It was a complication, and Wyatt's life was built on the avoidance of all complications. When he returned at midday, soaking wet and caked in mud, the smell of food hit him from 20 yards away. It stopped him. It was not just the smell of smoke. It was coffee. It was biscuits. He pushed the door open. The cabin was warmer. The floor, which he always kept clean, was cleaner. She had swept the stones and scrubbed the top of the table. A pot of something was simmering on the stove, and a tin of badly shaped, pale biscuits sat on the hearth. She was standing by the stove, her back to him, stirring the pot. She was wearing one of his old wool shirts. It was enormous on her, the sleeves rolled up a dozen times, the tail of it hitting her mid-thigh. He hadn't given it to her. She had just taken it. "I found it in the chest," she said, not turning. "It was either this or the blue satin. The satin's not much for housework." She had a ladle in her hand. "It's just beans and the last of that bacon," she said. "And I made biscuits. They're not good. I don't know how to cook with a stove like this." He stood in the doorway, dripping on her clean floor. He said nothing. He took off his coat, hung it, and sat at the table. She put a bowl in front of him. It was hot. He ate. The beans were boiled to a mush, and the biscuits were heavy as lead. But it was the first hot meal he hadn't had to make himself in 3 years. "It's passable," he said, wiping his mouth. She sat opposite him, nursing her own bowl, her eyes on his face. The sharp, brittle girl was still gone, replaced by this quiet, watchful creature. "Your feet," he said, gesturing with his spoon. "They hurt," she said simply. "But they're better. You have good salve." He grunted. He finished his bowl and pushed it away. He looked at her, really looked at her. She was too thin. Her skin was pale, not from delicacy, but from a lack of sun and decent food. Her hands, wrapped around the bowl, were red and raw from the lye soap she'd used on the floor. But there were other marks on her hands, faint, silvery lines on her knuckles, and a small, puckered scar on the back of her left hand, round as a coin. Old wounds. "The road will be clear in another day," he said. "I know," she said, looking down at her bowl. "I'll be gone. You won't have to see me again." But the next day, the road was not clear. A rock slide had come down with the rain, and the mud was still a foot deep. He gave her another task. He threw a pair of his torn denim trousers at her. "Mend these." He went out to the barn to reshoe his horse. He was clumsy with the tools. His focus was gone. He kept listening for the sound of her voice, but the cabin remained silent. When he came back in, she was sitting by the window, the trousers in her lap. She had pricked her finger. A small bead of her blood was welling up. She was staring at it, her face pale. I'm not very good at sewing," she said. "Just do it," he said, and went to clean his rifle. She did. The stitches were small, uneven, and tight. It was ugly, but it would hold. He took the trousers from her without a word. The third day became the fourth. He gave her a pair of his old boots, and she stuffed the toes with rags until they fit. Her bandaged feet were now hidden inside his worn leather. A strange, domestic quiet settled over them. It was a silence he had not invited, but it was there. She would cook, he would eat, she would clean, he would watch. He silently allowed her to stay. He did not ask her name again, and she did not ask his. They were just two people in a small stone house, waiting for the mud to dry. On the fifth day, the sun came out, hot and brutal, baking the earth dry. And with the sun, the old Clara returned. Her feet were mostly healed. She walked out onto the porch in his boots, her hands on her hips, and watched him split firewood. The silence was finally broken. "You swing that axe like you're mad at it," she called out. He did not pause. The axe fell, the wood split clean. "I suppose a man living out here has to be mad at something," she continued. Walking closer, she kept a safe distance, just outside the range of any flying splinters. The weather, the cattle, or just the fact that God forgot to put any decent people nearby. He set up another log. "I don't much care for people." Is that so?" She laughed, a brighter sound than he'd heard from her before. "Am I not people, or am I just something you found in the barn?" "You're a complication," he said, and swung the axe. "That's a better word than most I've been called." She sat on the porch step, her chin in her hands. "Back in the city, I was a problem. Before that, I was a burden. I think I prefer complication. It sounds more interesting." He kept chopping. He could feel her eyes on his back, on the muscles of his arms. "Men are funny," she said, her voice turning thoughtful, musing. "They build fences and walls and think it makes them strong, but they're just afraid." He stopped. He turned, leaning on the axe. "What do you know about men?" "Everything," she said, and her smile was sharp. I know they like to think they're in charge. I know they like a woman who is quiet and nods. I know they say they want a good woman, but their eyes always follow the one in the cheap dress. She looked down at the old wool shirt she wore. And I know they're all, every one of them, terrified of a woman who isn't afraid of them. He stared at her. The splinter was back, twisting under his skin. You should go back inside, he said, his voice low. Why? Am I making you nervous? Wyatt. She used his name for the first time. It sounded strange in her mouth, too familiar. You're talking nonsense. Am I? Her smile faded, fast as a candle in a breeze. I suppose I am. It's a bad habit. Talking. Preacher Gideon always said a talking woman was a gate to hell. Then he sounds like a smart man, Wyatt said, and turned back to the wood. He heard her stand up. He heard the porch boards creak. He thought she was leaving. He was wrong. You know, she said, her voice right behind him now. Gideon was a preacher. He said he was saving my soul. He said it while his hands were… Well, preachers are the worst. They think God gives them the right… Wyatt stopped. He did not turn. You're not a preacher, are you, Wyatt? She whispered. No. That's good. I hate preachers. She was silent for a beat. I don't hate you. Not yet. That night, the tension in the cabin was so thick he could have cut it with his knife. The road was passable. He knew it. She knew it. The settlement was only 5 miles away. He could take her there, leave her at the boarding house, let Mrs. Pierce deal with her, and ride away. But he had not. He had not. He told himself it was because she was useful. The house was clean. The food was hot. He told himself it was a fair trade for shelter. It was a lie. They ate dinner in a heavy, charged silence. He was reading a newspaper that was 2 weeks old, but he was not seeing the words. He was aware of every move she made, the way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the way she breathed. She got up to clear his plate. He grunted, not looking up. Her hand brushed his shoulder. It was not an accident. He felt the light touch through his shirt. A jolt, like static. He stiffened. She did not move away. She leaned down, closer, as if to take the plate. Her hair, which she had washed in his lye soap, brushed his cheek. She smelled of pine and smoke. You're a lonely man, Wyatt, she murmured, her voice a low vibration. He turned his head. His face was inches from hers. She was too close. Her eyes were dark, challenging, unreadable. He could see the small scar on her lip. You should go, he said, his voice a rasp. I know, she whispered, but I won't. She leaned in, her lips almost touching his ear. The warmth of her breath on his skin made him want to flinch, but he was frozen. And then she whispered the words. It hurts. It's my first time. Time stopped. The words slammed into him, breaking through his defenses with brutal, unexpected force. He didn't hear a tease. He heard a confession. He heard a girl, terrified and in pain. He saw her bloody feet in the barn. He saw the scars on her hands. He saw a creature, trapped and wounded, and he was the one causing the pain. He reacted without thinking. It was a recoil, violent and total. He shoved his chair back, throwing himself away from her. The chair legs screeched on the stone, and then the whole thing toppled over, crashing to the floor with a sound like a gunshot. He was on his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was breathing hard, as if he'd been running. He stared at her. His face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were wide, and in them was a dark, raw horror. She did not flinch. She did not move. She just stood there, watching him, her face pale. Then a slow, cold grin spread across her mouth. It was not a smile. It was a grimace of triumph. It was the ugliest thing he had ever seen. Got you, she said. Her voice was brittle, cracking. You're just like all the rest of them, scared. He did not trust himself to speak. The urge to hit her, to shake her, to what? The urge was so strong it left a metallic taste in his mouth. He did not know what he wanted. He just knew that what she had done, the words she had used, was a violation. He grabbed his coat from the peg by the door. He ripped the door open and stormed out into the night, slamming it so hard the windows rattled in their frames. He went to the woodpile. The moon was high, a cold, white eye in the black sky. He seized the axe. He set a log, and he swung. The wood cracked. He swung again, and again. He was not thinking about her body. He was not thinking about lust. That would have been simple, that he could have understood. He was thinking about the word, hurts. He was thinking about her grin, the grin of a cornered animal that had found a way to bite. His shame was a physical thing, hot and choking. Shame that she had seen him. Shame that he had let her stay. Shame that for one terrible second, he had believed her. And underneath the shame, underneath the rage, was the guilt. A guilt so old it was part of his bones. It was the guilt of Laramie, the guilt of a saloon that smelled of stale beer and blood. He saw the face of the man he'd shot, the look of surprise, the red stain spreading on his cheap shirt. He had killed that man to protect Silas, a friend, a man who was weak. Wyatt swung the axe, the blade biting deep. He had run. He had left Silas to face the law, to explain the body. He had run and not looked back. He had killed a man for a friend who didn't stay, or had he been the one who didn't stay? He had run and hidden and built a life where he could not be asked to protect anyone, a life where he could not hurt anyone. Until now. He chopped wood until his hands were raw and blistering, the handle of the axe slick with his own sweat. He chopped until the moon set and the sky turned a pale, sick gray. He chopped until his arms were lead. His back was a single knot of fire, and the cold, hollow longing in his chest was quieted by pure, animal exhaustion. The next morning, she was quiet. The enormous pile of freshly split wood outside the window was a testament to his night. He was slumped in the chair he had righted, asleep. When she woke, she was different. The sharp edges were gone. The brittle grin was gone. She looked pale, and her eyes were shadowed, as if she had not slept at all. She looked bruised, though he had never laid a hand on her. She made coffee, the movements small and careful, as if not to wake him. But he was awake. He was always awake. He watched her through slitted eyes. She brought the cup to the table. She sat. She stared at her own hands. "Wyatt," she said, her voice a dry whisper. "About last night. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." He opened his eyes. They were red-rimmed from smoke and lack of sleep, and they were as hard and empty as the high desert. "Don't." The word was not loud, but it cut the air between them, sharp as a razor. She flinched. She closed her mouth. She looked down at her hands, at the old, silvery scars. She remembered the feel of the stove lid, the smell of her own burning skin. She was 14. Brother Gideon had found her reading a paperback novel she'd stolen from a drummer's saddlebag. He had not hit her. He was too clever for that. "The disobedient hand must be cleansed," he had said, his voice a thick, sweet syrup. "The hand that reaches for sin must be purified by fire. You are my ward, Clara, my sacred trust. You owe me obedience. You owe me everything." He had taken her from the orphanage in Albuquerque, a small, nameless girl sold as a child servant to his house of mercy. It was a workhouse, where girls scrubbed floors and mended linens for 12 hours a day, all for the good of Gideon's soul and his pocket. The scar was his brand, a reminder that she was his property. Wyatt watched her. He saw her staring at her hands. He saw the scar. He looked away. Out the window, he saw a saloon, Laramie, 10 years ago. He was 25, full of piss and cheap whiskey. He was laughing. His friend Silas, a small, nervous man who lived by his wits and a deck of cards, was at the table. A big, drunk miner named Bigelow had accused Silas of cheating. Bigelow was a brute. He pulled a long skinning knife. Silas had looked at Wyatt, his eyes wide with terror. Wyatt had been stupid. He'd been loyal. He'd stepped in. "Leave it be," he'd said. The miner had laughed and lunged, not at Wyatt, but at Silas. Wyatt drew. He was fast. He had always been fast. The shot was deafening. The miner fell, dead. Silence. The piano player stopped. The women stopped. Everyone stared. Wyatt looked at the smoking gun in his hand. He looked at the dead man. He looked at Silas. "Wyatt," Silas had whispered, horrified. The sheriff's whistle blew outside. Wyatt didn't wait. He didn't think. He looked at his friend, and then he turned and ran out the back door. He stole a horse and rode south. He had been running ever since. He never saw Silas again. He never knew if Silas was safe or if he'd been arrested as an accessory. He just knew he'd killed a man for a friend who might not have even needed saving, and he had fled the law. He looked back at Clara. She was still staring at her hands. He was still staring out the window. The silence in the cabin was different now. It was not empty. It was full. It was full of the things they both knew but could not say. He knew she was a runaway, branded and hurt. She knew he was a man capable of a cold, violent stillness. The silence between them became heavy with understanding, but neither of them spoke a word of it. The heavy silence of that morning did not last. The sky, which had cleared for a single, deceptive day, turned back on itself. The clouds rolled in from the north, not purple and bruised this time, but a low, flat, endless sheet of gray, and it began to rain. It was not a storm. It was a flood. It rained for 3 days without pause, a steady, cold, perpendicular rain that did not thunder but simply fell, as if the sky had given up and was draining itself onto the high desert. The small creek that cut through Wyatt's land, the one he had cursed for being dry 2 months ago, became a monster. It transformed into a roaring, churning river of red-brown water, thick as molasses, carrying with it whole trees, sections of fence, and the carcass of a bloated steer. Wyatt stood on his porch, Clara a silent shadow in the doorway behind him, and watched the world he knew dissolve. The road was not just muddy, it was gone. The arroyo was a lake. The valley floor was a shallow, moving sea. They were not trapped for a day. They were marooned. An island of one stone cabin, a barn, and a patch of high ground in a newly made ocean of mud. The first day of the new rain, they were strangers again. The truce forged by their shared exhaustion and unspoken confessions was washed away. Wyatt was grim, pacing the cabin, his energy trapped. He was a man who lived by motion, by work, and the flood had made him a prisoner in his own home. He cleaned his guns, his movements sharp and angry. He oiled his saddle, though he could not ride. Clara stayed in her corner, by the hearth, mending his clothes with her clumsy, tight stitches. She did not talk. She did not tease. She just watched him, her eyes following his restless movements. The air in the cabin was heavy, wet, and thick with the smell of damp wool and simmering resentment. By the 3rd day of the rain, the food was running low. Wyatt had a side of bacon and half a deer salted and hanging, but the flour was dwindling. The small garden he kept had been washed into the mud. "We need to check the stores in the barn," he said, pulling on his high boots. "I'll come," she said. "No, you'll stay. You'll need help carrying things back, unless you plan to float them." Her voice was flat, not teasing, just stating a fact. He looked at her, at the ridiculous sight of her in his oversized boots, her small, pale face lost in the collar of his shirt. He grunted, but it was agreement. The journey to the barn, normally a walk of 100 paces, took them 10 minutes. They waded through knee-deep, sucking mud that pulled at their boots. The rain plastered their hair to their heads. When they finally slid the barn door open, the sound of the rain was replaced by the nervous stomping of his 3 horses and the lowing of the 2 milk cows. They were safe, but they were restless. They worked in a strained, efficient rhythm. Clara was not strong, but she was quick. She held the sacks open while he shoveled oats. She found the hidden box of canned peaches he'd forgotten. She did not complain about the mud, or the smell, or the cold. She just worked. As they were leaving, one of the horses, a young gelding, kicked the side of its stall, its eyes rolling in fear at the endless drumming on the roof. Clara stopped. She did not approach the horse. She just stood and looked at it. "He's afraid," she said, her voice barely audible. "He'll get over it," Wyatt said, his arms full of sacks. "Do they?" she asked, her gaze distant. "Get over it? Or do they just get older, and the fear just settles in, like a bad winter?" Wyatt looked at her. He did not know how to answer. He did not know what she was talking about. Or perhaps he did, and that was the problem. "Let's go," he said, turning. "We're burning daylight." They lived that way for a week. The rain would stop for a few hours, and they would venture out. They mended the fence on the high ridge, the only part of his land not under water. Clara was clumsy with the tools. She dropped the wire stretchers and tangled the wire. He snapped at her. "Just hold it, that's all. Just hold it still." "I'm trying," she snapped back, her hands red and raw. "I wasn't raised to build fences. I was raised to scrub floors with lye." He flinched, as if she had struck him. He took the tool from her, his anger gone, replaced by that cold stillness. "Go back to the house. The fire's dying." She did not go. She stood her ground, her chin set, and held the fence post while he worked the wire. Their routine became a strange, unspoken dance. It was almost domestic, but it was the domesticity of two survivors on a raft, not a home. They cooked together. She would peel the potatoes, her small hands struggling with the knife, the peelings coming off in thick, wasteful chunks. He would take the knife from her, not unkindly, and show her, "Like this, thin, don't waste it." She would watch his large, scarred hands perform the small, precise task. They sat on the porch in the evenings, the rain having eased to a gray drizzle. They watched the world drown. They were two small, quiet figures, him in his chair, her on the top step, watching the new, gray river that had been his front pasture. "How long can it go on?" she asked one night, her voice small in the vast, wet darkness. "The rain? This being stuck until the water drops," he said. "Another week, maybe. The mud will be a problem long after." "A whole week," she said. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "I've never been in one place this long, not since I ran." He did not reply. He was cleaning his gun. It was a ritual she'd come to expect. Every night, he broke it down. The Colt, he would lay the pieces on an oilcloth. The cylinder, the barrel, the frame. He would clean each piece with a single-minded focus. "You're very good at that," she said. He grunted, sliding the oiled rag through the barrel. "You're not a rancher, are you?" His hand stopped. He did not look up. "This ranch is mine. I built this house." "That's not what I mean. The men in the settlement, the ones who work cattle, they have rifles. They carry pistols when they go to town. But you wear that gun like it's part of your skin. You clean it like it's a religious rite." He slowly began to reassemble the pistol, the clicks of the metal precise and final. "It's a tool," he said, his voice flat. "That's what you said before, but you've got scars. That one." She pointed to his left forearm, a long, white line that disappeared under his shirt sleeve, "and the one on your jaw, just under your ear. Those aren't from falling off a horse." He slid the pistol into its holster. He stood up. He walked to the window and stared out at the dark, wet world. "You talk too much, Clara, and you don't talk at all." "That's the problem. We're sitting here, breathing the same air, eating the same food. I am wearing your clothes, and I don't even know you. You don't know me." "I know enough," he said. "No, you don't. You know what you saw. A girl in a cheap dress, a girl with a reputation, a girl who hid in your barn." She stood up, her voice gaining a sharp, brittle edge. "You don't know anything. And you, what do you know about me?" he said, turning. His anger was a low, cold thing. "You see a man with a gun, a man with scars? What do you think? I'm a killer, an outlaw? Is that what's kept you mending my socks? Fear?" "Yes," she cried, and the word hung in the air, raw and honest. "At first, yes, I was terrified. I thought, after what I said, that night, I thought you'd throw me out. Or worse." "I'm not him," Wyatt said, his voice a low growl. I'm not that preacher. How do I know? All I know is you chop wood like you're killing snakes and you won't say a decent word to me. What am I supposed to think? He stared at her. He saw her. Really saw her. Not the tease, not the victim, but a creature as cornered and as dangerous as he was. And he was tired. The weight of the running, the silence, the Laramie saloon, it was all there. In his throat. He sat down, the chair creaking under his weight. He rubbed his face with his hands. I was 25, he said. The words came out rough, like stones. Clara froze. She sat back down on the stool. I was in Laramie, working as a stock guard. I had a friend, Silas. He was a card player, not a good one, but he was my friend. He was small, weak. Wyatt stared at the floor, seeing the sawdust of the saloon. A man, a miner, Bigelow. He caught Silas dealing from the bottom. He was drunk. He pulled a knife, a pig sticker. He was going to gut Silas. He stopped. He could smell the stale beer. What did you do? Clara whispered. I was wearing this gun, the same one. I told him to back off. Bigelow laughed. He said my friend needed a keeper. He lunged at Silas. Wyatt looked up, his eyes meeting hers. They were dead. Empty. I shot him. I didn't mean to kill him. I meant to stop him. But I was young, and I was fast. I hit him center mass. He was dead before he hit the floor. You saved your friend, she said. I ran, he said, the words bitter. The sheriff's whistle blew. Silas was just staring at me, at the body. I didn't wait. I didn't stay to explain. I ran out the back. I stole a horse. I've been running ever since. That was 10 years ago. But it was a fair fight, she insisted. You were defending him. It doesn't matter. It was my gun. It was my bullet. I took a life, and I fled the law. He looked at his hands. So, yes, I'm a killer. And the scar on my arm is from a knife in a card game in Dodge. And the one on my jaw is from a bottle in a brothel in Abilene. I am not a good man. Clara, I'm just a man who ran far enough to find some quiet. Now you know. The cabin was silent, save for the steady drip of water from the eaves. Clara looked at him, and her eyes were not filled with fear. They were filled with a deep, aching sadness. She had tried to wound him with her words, and he had handed her his whole, broken history. She got up. She went to the hearth. She added a log to the fire, the one he had chopped. The flame sparked and rose. She sat on the floor, on the worn buffalo hide he used as a rug. She stared into the flames. 15, she said, her voice soft. He looked at her, confused. What? That's how old I was. When Preacher Gideon tried to sell me, Wyatt's head came up. Sell you? He called it marriage, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. He ran the House of Mercy. I was his ward. He'd had me since I was 10. I owed him. He said he had a friend, an old man, a rancher from the high country. He had money, and he liked young girls. She picked at a loose thread on her trousers. Gideon told me I was to be married. He had the papers drawn up. He said it was God's will. I was to be a wife at 15 to a man who was 60. My God, Wyatt whispered. Gideon got a good price for me. $300. I saw the letter. The rancher was coming in a week. I was supposed to be prepared. Gideon gave me a new dress, not blue satin, white muslin, like a lamb. What did you do? I tried to say no. I begged. He locked me in the cellar. He said he would cleanse the sin of disobedience from me. She unconsciously rubbed the old scar on her hand. I knew what that meant, so I stopped saying no. I pretended. I said I was grateful. I said I saw the wisdom of God's plan. She smiled. But it was the grin from that other night, the one that broke his heart. It was the grin of the trap. I was his favorite. You see, I was the one who could read. I handled his accounts. He was so busy saving souls. He was a very poor bookkeeper. He trusted me. So, the night before the rancher was to arrive, I went into his office. I took every dollar he had in the cash box, $46, and I took the papers. Not the marriage papers. I took a stack of the blank travel warrants he used for his missionaries. He had a stamp. with the governor's seal. I stole that, too. She looked up at Wyatt, and her eyes were shining, not with tears, in the firelight. I made my own papers. I wrote that I was Clara Duval, that I was 21, that I was a teacher from Illinois, traveling to Santa Fe to care for a sick relative. I stamped it, and I walked out. I used the money to buy a stage ticket. I've been running ever since. He thinks I stole from him. He thinks I'm his property. He will never, ever stop looking for me. They sat in the quiet. He was a killer who had run. She was a thief who had run, both running from a past that was hunting them. "You're not broken," he said, his voice hoarse. "You're smart. You survived." She laughed, a small, choked sound. "Am I?" She looked up at him, and now the tears were there, glistening on her pale cheeks. "I'm so tired of being smart, Wyatt. I'm so tired of running. I just want to stop, but I'm afraid. I'm afraid I'll always be that girl, the one in the cheap dress, the one no one will ever really want. Not without expecting something in return. Not without a price." She was crying now, silent tears tracking through the dirt on her face. "I'm afraid I'm so broken that no one can ever touch me without it hurting." Wyatt's heart felt like it was being compressed in a vice. All his guilt, all his shame, all his long, cold years of loneliness centered on this small, weeping girl. He did not know what to say. He had no words of comfort. He had no right to offer any. He was a killer. He was the man who had run. He got up from his chair. He walked to the fire. He knelt in front of her. She flinched, her eyes wide, expecting a blow, or an advance, or just anger. He did not speak. He did not touch her face. He did not pull her into an embrace. He simply held out his hand, his large, calloused, scarred hand. She stared at it. "You're safe here," he whispered. Just those 3 words. She looked at his hand, then at his face. His eyes were not dead. They were full of a pain that matched her own. Slowly, hesitantly, she put her hand in his. His fingers closed around it, warm and strong. He said nothing else. He just knelt there, holding her hand. He held it as the fire burned down to embers. He held it as her sobs quieted. He held it as her breathing deepened, and her head, heavy with exhaustion and confession, slowly nodded. She slumped to the side, her head coming to rest on his knee. He did not move. After a long time, he gently extricated his hand. She mumbled, but did not wake. She had curled up on the buffalo hide, on the warm stones of the hearth, asleep, truly asleep. He sat back in his chair, not in the loft. He sat and watched her. He watched her sleep. This girl who was not broken, but who was bent under the weight of her past. He felt a strange, fierce, and terrifying emotion welling in his chest. It was not lust. It was not pity. It was possession. Not the way Gideon meant it. It was the feeling that this small, sleeping creature was his to protect, and that terrified him more than any lawman. The moment of peace lasted for 2 days. The water began to recede. The world began to look like itself again. Though it was scarred and raw, they were quiet, but the silence was different. It was a shared silence. Comfortable. He taught her how to sight his rifle. She taught him a card game she'd learned from a drummer. They were almost happy. The calm was shattered by the sound of a horse. It was not a familiar sound. It was a horse in a hurry, splashing through the mud. Wyatt was on his feet before the rider was even in view, his hand on his gun. Clara shrank back, her eyes on the door. A man burst into the clearing. It was Jed Miller. His face was pale, his horse lathered. He didn't dismount. "Wyatt!" he shouted, his voice high with panic. "Wyatt! Thank God! I was afraid you'd been washed out." Wyatt walked onto the porch. "Jed, what is it?" Jed saw Clara then, standing in the shadow of the doorway. His eyes widened, and he had the decency to look ashamed. "Ma'am, well, that's good. You're safe." "What is it, Jed?" Wyatt repeated, his voice hard. "It's the settlement. Wyatt, a man rode in 2 days ago. A preacher, rode in with 2 hired men from Santa Fe." Clara made a sound, a small, sick noise. She gripped the door frame, her knuckles turning white. Wyatt's blood went cold. "He's been asking after her," Jed said, pointing at Clara. "He's got papers. Says her name is Clara. Says she's an indentured servant who ran from his mission in Albuquerque. Says she stole from him. Says she's his legal property. He's claiming he has a warrant for her return." Jed took a ragged breath. "His name is Gideon, and he's telling everyone in town that she's a whore and a thief, and that he's come to reclaim what's his. He's going to drag her back. Wyatt, he says he's got the law on his side." The sound of Jed Miller's horse faded, swallowed by the sucking mud. The world was quiet again, but the silence was poisoned. Clara stood frozen in the doorway, her hand still gripping the frame. She looked small, a child again, lost in his oversized wool shirt. The color had drained from her face, leaving her skin the color of dirty snow. Wyatt turned from the porch and closed the door. The sound of the latch sliding home was unnaturally loud, a final, metallic click. He walked past her, his face a mask of cold stone. He went to the wall, to the peg where his gun belt hung. He took it down. The weight of it in his hands was familiar, a grim comfort. "Wyatt," her voice was a bare whisper, the sound a dry leaf makes. He did not answer. He began checking the loads in his Colt, spinning the cylinder with a practiced thumb. "Wyatt, please, you can't." She came toward him, her hands outstretched, but she did not touch him. She was afraid to. "He has men. He has the law. You heard Jed? He has a warrant." "It's a false warrant," Wyatt said, his voice low and toneless. "It doesn't matter if it's false. It's a piece of paper. A man with a badge will honor it. They'll come here, they'll kill you, or they'll arrest you." Her voice cracked, a new terror entering her eyes, something he hadn't seen before. "Laramie, Wyatt, they'll find out about Laramie. He'll tell them. He will trade you for me." Wyatt slid the pistol into its holster. He buckled the belt around his hips. It settled onto him, a part of his body he had neglected, but which was his truest skin. "He's not taking you," he said. "He won't," she cried, and the desperation made her voice sharp. "Because I won't be here. I'm leaving. I'll run. I'm good at it. Wyatt, I'm better at it than anything." "No." The word was absolute. It stopped her. "This time," he said, turning to face her. "You don't run." "You don't understand," she shouted. The force of it, the raw, sudden volume, made the tin cups on the shelf rattle. "You don't understand what it's like, to be property, to be a thing that can be reclaimed, like a stray cow, like a stolen saddle. He doesn't see a person. He sees an investment. He sees something that belongs to him. You can't fight that with a gun. Wyatt, you can't shoot an idea." She was pacing now, frantic, her hands twisting in the folds of his shirt. "He will never stop. If you fight him and win, he'll send other men. If you kill him, the law will hang you. If he kills you, I... She stopped, unable to say it. "I'll go north," she said, her voice regaining its quick, calculating edge. The smart girl who ran. "I'll head for Trinidad. I can get to the train line. He'll look for me here. He'll waste a week. By then, I'll be in Denver. I'll be someone else." "You'll run," he said, and the contempt in his voice was not for her. It was for the word itself. "You'll run. And what about me? I'm supposed to sit here, safe? Let him come, find you gone, and just ride away?" "Yes," she cried. "You'll be safe. He doesn't want you. He wants me. This is my fight. You think this is what I want, to be safe?" He stalked toward her, his anger a low, cold fire. "To be the man who hid? To let him drag you back to whatever hell he has planned? To sit here and clean my guns while he puts his hands on you? It's my life, Wyatt. It's my soul. It's not yours to save. And what if I want it to be?" he roared. The words exploded from him, from a place 10 years buried. The cabin fell silent. She stared at him, her eyes wide, her chest heaving. He turned away from her, the anger coiling into a knot of bitter shame. "You don't know," he spat. his voice thick with the memory of a saloon floor. "You stand there and tell me I don't understand. You don't understand. You don't know what it feels like to kill a man, to protect someone." His voice cracked. "To stain your hands, to throw your whole life away on one gunshot, all for a friend, and then have to live with the fact that they weren't worth it, that they didn't stay, that you were the only one who paid." He slammed his fist onto the table. "I'm not running this time, Clara. I'm not killing for someone who's just going to run away." She stared at his back, at the rigid line of his shoulders. The anger in her face dissolved, replaced by a cold, devastating understanding. He wasn't Silas. He wasn't the man who ran. He was the man who was going to stay. And for her, that was a death sentence. The day died. It bled out into a long, gray, miserable evening. They did not speak. The argument was over, and they had both lost. He sat at the table, his back to her. He was not cleaning his gun. He was sharpening his knife. The long, thin skinning knife. The shing, shing, shing of the steel on the whetstone was the only sound. A rhythmic, scraping noise that set her teeth on edge. It was the sound of a man preparing for a butcher's work. She did what she always did. She made food. She fried the last of the salt pork and boiled the last of the coffee. They ate in absolute silence. The sound of their forks on the tin plates a small, sad percussion. Afterward, he did not go to the loft. He sat in his chair, tipped it back against the wall, and closed his eyes. He put the knife on the table. Within easy reach, he was a sentinel. He was a jailer. She waited. She sat on the hearth, staring into the embers, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She waited for hours. She listened to his breathing. It was long and deep, but it was not the breathing of sleep. It was the breathing of a predator. Finally, long after midnight, when the moon had set and the cabin was plunged into a profound, suffocating darkness, she heard it, a faint, subtle shift in his breathing, a small snore that was cut off. He was asleep. She rose, moving with the silence of a ghost. She did not grab her things. She did not go to the door. She just stood, listening. His breathing remained steady, deep. She moved to the chest, to the tattered, cheap blue dress. She looked at it, then at the warm wool shirt she was wearing. His shirt. She looked at the sturdy boots on her feet. His boots. She couldn't take them. It felt like the final theft, the one that would prove Gideon right. Slowly, her hands trembling so hard she could barely work the buttons, she began to unfasten the shirt. "Leave it on!" Her scream was a choked gasp, swallowed by the darkness. He was not asleep. He was sitting in the chair, a dark shadow against the darker wall, his eyes open, watching her. He had been waiting. "You can't go out there in a chemise," he said, his voice a flat, dead thing. "You'll freeze before you make the creek, and the boots are yours. I burned the old ones." She stood there, frozen, her hand at her collar. "Wyatt, please, don't make me be the reason. I can't have your death on my hands, and I can't have your life on mine," he said. He stood up, a great shadow detaching itself from the wall. "I can't be the man who let you go. You have to," she whispered, and her voice broke. The smart girl, the runner, the survivor. She evaporated. All that was left was the child in the barn, her feet bleeding. "Please, Wyatt, I can't do this. I can't watch you die for me." The thread snapped, the dam of all her years of running, of pretending, of being tough. It broke. She slid to the floor, her knees hitting the cold stone. She didn't just cry. She sobbed, a raw animal sound of pure, undiluted grief. It was the sound of a creature that had been hunted for so long it had forgotten what it was to rest. He stood over her, his hands clenched, his heart at war with his own past. He was the man who ran. He was the man who hid. With a groan that seemed to rise from the soles of his feet, he fell to his knees. He didn't kneel. He collapsed. He fell onto the stone floor in front of her and pulled her to him. She fought, her small fists beating a frantic, weak tattoo against his chest. Let me go! Let me go! He didn't. He wrapped his arms around her, pinning her, holding her against his chest as if he could absorb her pain into his own body. He held her, his chin resting on the top of her head, and let her break. He didn't realize he was crying until he felt the hot tears track down his cheeks and fall into her hair. He was weeping, not for her, not for himself. He was weeping for the wasted, lonely years, for the saloon in Laramie, for the man he had been, and the man he had just, in this one terrible moment, become. I won't let him take you, he whispered into her hair, his voice thick and broken. I'm here. I am right here. She pulled back, her face a pale, tear-streaked ruin in the dim light from the embers. His was no better. Wyatt, she breathed, her hand coming up to his rough cheek. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of seduction. It was not a kiss of lust. It was a desperate, drowning kiss. It was a collision. It was raw and honest, and tasted of salt and coffee and loneliness. It was the kiss of two people who had run out of words and out of time. Her mouth opened under his, a gasp that he swallowed. Her hands, which had been fisted in his shirt, uncurled. They clung to his shoulders, then tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was washing away. He was the one who broke it, pulling back just enough to rest his forehead against hers. His breath was ragged, shaking his whole frame. Clara, he said, and her name was a prayer. He kissed her again, but this time it was different. It was gentle. He kissed her eyelids, tasting the salt of her tears. He kissed the small, puckered scar on her hand. He kissed the corner of her mouth. She began to tremble, a deep, violent tremor that shook her from head to toe. You're shaking, he whispered, his own voice unsteady. I'm afraid, she admitted, her voice so small he barely heard it. His heart stopped. Of me? No. She looked him in the eyes, her own dark and endless in the firelight. I'm afraid of being touched by someone who. I'm afraid of this, of not being afraid. He understood. In that moment, he understood everything. He understood the preacher's hands, the greedy eyes, the years of touch that was only pain, or power, or a price. He pulled back. We can stop. No, she whispered, her hands tightening in his hair. Don't stop, please. Just be gentle. He lifted her. She was impossibly light. He carried her, not to the loft, but to the buffalo hide on the floor, in front of the warm embers. He laid her down as if she were made of spun glass. He was a rough man. His hands were calloused, scarred, and built for violence. But he touched her with a patience that was a revelation. He did not rush. He did not take. He unwrapped her, layer by layer, as if he were tending a mortal wound. He slid his own wool shirt from her shoulders. He kissed the faint, crisscrossed scars on her ribs. He untied the laces of her chemise. He trembled with the force of his own restraint. He, who had taken what he wanted in brothels from Dodge to Abilene, was now terrified of moving too fast. When she was bare in the firelight, she was all sharp angles and pale skin. She was beautiful, and she was a roadmap of her own history. She watched him, her eyes wide, unblinking. As he looked at her, he made love to her. It was slow, and it was raw, and it was emotional. He watched her face, memorizing every flicker of her expression. When he saw a shadow of fear, he stopped. He gentled. He waited. Clara was trembling, but it was not from fear. It was from the shocking, overwhelming, agonizing tenderness of it. It was the first time in her life she had been touched with patience. It was the first time she had been touched as if she were precious. It was rewriting every cruel hand, every painful memory. When it was over, they lay tangled on the hide, the fire warm on their skin. He was on his side, his head propped on his hand, just watching her. She was quiet, staring at the embers. A single tear escaped the corner of her eye and tracked down her temple. That's the first time, she whispered, her voice thick. He waited, his heart in his throat. She turned her head, meeting his gaze. That's the first time, she said, her voice clear. It didn't hurt. Wyatt's throat closed. He turned his head, pressing his face into the fur of the hide so she would not see the sudden, sharp burn of his own tears. He almost wept. He just reached for her hand, the one with the scar, and held it. He woke before dawn, to the cold, gray light of a new day. He had not truly slept. He had drifted, holding her, listening to the sound of her breathing. He felt changed. He felt scoured clean. She was asleep, her face peaceful for the first time. He slipped away from her, his movements slow, and covered her with a blanket. He built up the fire. He made coffee. He had a plan. He would not fight Gideon. He would not be arrested. He would take her. They would ride north, into the high country, where no one had ever heard of Laramie, or of a preacher's stolen property. He went to the barn to saddle the horses. Both of them. He was whistling, a thin, tuneless sound. When he returned to the cabin, it was empty. Clara? The blanket was folded neatly on the hide. The fire was crackling. A cup of coffee, the one he had poured for her, sat steaming on the table, and next to it was a piece of paper, one of her forged travel warrants. He picked it up. There were only a few words, written in pencil, in her small, neat hand. I am not Silas. Don't waste your life for me. He crushed the paper in his fist. Damn her, he whispered. He ran to the door. The gelding, his fastest horse, was gone. He rode for a full day. He did not sleep. He pushed his remaining mare, a tough, rangy bay, to her limit. He knew where she was going. Trinidad, the train station. It was the only way out. He arrived as the sun was setting. The town was a dusty, wind-blown stop on the rail line. He heard the whistle of the evening train, still miles distant. He saw the gelding, tied badly to a hitching post outside the station, exhausted and lathered. He dismounted, his legs stiff, his whole body aching. He didn't run. He walked. He settled his gun belt, and he walked through the door of the station. He heard the voice first. Gideon's. It was not the voice of a preacher. It was oily and cold and full of triumph. You will pay for the horse. You will pay for the money. And you will pay for your disobedience. Clara, the Lord is merciful, but I am not. Wyatt stepped into the waiting room. She was there, backed against the wall by the ticket counter. Gideon was in front of her, his tall, thin frame in its black suit looking like an undertaker's. With him were two men, hired men. They wore city clothes, but they were brutes. One of them had his hand gripped on Clara's arm. Let her go, Wyatt said. The room went silent. Clara's head snapped up. Her face was not filled with relief. It was filled with abject horror. Wyatt, no, go, please, go. Gideon smiled, a thin, reptilian smile. Ah, the rancher, the man who harbors my property. You have made this very easy. Sir, you are an accessory. I said, Wyatt repeated, taking a slow step forward. Let her go. The man holding Clara laughed. Or what? Old man. The other one, a thick-set man with a broken nose, stepped forward. This is official business. Friend, we have papers. You best move on. I don't care about your papers, Wyatt said. The broken-nosed man lunged. He was fast. Wyatt was faster. He didn't draw. He met the man's charge, stepping inside the punch. He hit him once, in the throat, with the heel of his hand. A hard, short jab. The man made a gurgling sound, and his eyes went wide. He grabbed his neck and fell to his knees. The first man let go of Clara, his hand dropping to the pistol on his hip. Wyatt was on him. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it. There was a sickening, wet snap. The man screamed. Wyatt broke the wrist, then brought his elbow up, connecting with the man's face. The man's nose dissolved in a spray of red. Wyatt turned. The man on the floor was still gasping. Wyatt kicked him, hard, in the side of the head. The man slumped to the floor and did not move. It had taken less than 5 seconds. Wyatt stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, his hands empty. He had nearly killed one of them. He looked at Gideon. The preacher had not moved. His smile was gone, but he was not afraid. He looked interested. "You are a very violent man," Gideon said. Wyatt walked toward him. "And you're a dead one." He reached for the preacher's throat. "I wouldn't—" The voice came from the doorway. A sheriff. His pistol was drawn and leveled at Wyatt's chest. "That's enough." "Friend," the sheriff said. Wyatt froze. "This man," Wyatt growled, "is a slaver." "And this man," Gideon said, stepping smoothly behind the sheriff, "is Wyatt Stone, wanted for murder in Laramie 10 years ago." The sheriff's eyes widened. He looked at Wyatt, then at the bloody men on the floor. "He's the man who shot Bigelow," Gideon said, his voice calm. "There is a $500 bounty, dead or alive." "He's lying!" Clara cried. The sheriff looked at Wyatt. Wyatt's face was hard. He did not deny it. "Damn," the sheriff said. "Arrest him," Gideon demanded. "I will," the sheriff said. "But I'm arresting you, too." He nodded at Gideon. "My telegraph operator tells me your warrant is a forgery. The House of Mercy in Albuquerque was shut down by the marshal's office 5 years ago for fraud." Gideon's face went white. The sheriff sighed. "So I got a killer, and I got a fraud, and I got a train coming." He looked at Wyatt. His face was tired. "You just saved me the trouble of dealing with these two, but I can't ignore a murder warrant, not one from Wyoming." He looked at the clock. "It'll take me all night to get a wire back from the marshal. Sunset's in 30 minutes. He looked at Wyatt. "If I found you in my town after sunset, I'd have to arrest you, I'd have to hold you, and I'd have to hold the girl as a witness." Wyatt understood. "You get out of Trinidad," the sheriff said, his voice low. "You take her. You ride north, into the mountains, and you don't come back. You leave town before sunset, or you will hang." Wyatt looked at Clara. She was staring at him, her hand over her mouth, her eyes shining. He nodded at the sheriff. "Once. Go," the sheriff said. "Now." Wyatt grabbed Clara's hand. He didn't pull. He held it, and together they ran from the station. They did not speak. He hauled her onto the mare, pulling himself up behind her. He grabbed the reins of the gelding. He rode out of Trinidad, not at a run, but at a steady, ground-eating trot. He did not look back. He rode north into the looming darkness of the mountains, leaving the train, the town, and the law behind. They rode for 2 days. The air grew thin and cold. The scrubby plains gave way to thick pine and jagged rock. The world was vertical, a place of sharp, blue shadows and wind that cut like a knife. Clara was slumped against him, not asleep, but in a state of exhausted surrender. He could feel her shivering, even through his own coat. He was a ghost in this high country. He had used it as his highway for 10 years, a way to move between territories without being seen. He knew its secrets, its hidden passes, its dead ends. He knew it as a fugitive knows his cell. On the 3rd day, when the horses were stumbling and their own breath was pluming in the frigid air, he found the place. It was not a cabin. It was a ruin, a lean-to, built by a trapper a generation ago, set deep in a box canyon, hidden by a stand of ancient, snow-dusted spruce. The roof was half collapsed, the stone chimney a pile of rubble. It was a place to die. It was perfect. He slid from the horse, his legs numb. He lifted Clara down. She was so light, she was barely there. She looked at the shack, at the gray, desolate rock. "Where are we?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Safe," he said. It was a lie. It was the coldest, most dangerous place he had ever been. But it was not on a map, and no one would ever look for them here. The first days were a kind of hell. The shack was colder than the outside, trapping the damp. They had one blanket. They slept huddled together on the dirt floor, not in passion, but like 2 exhausted animals, sharing warmth to survive. The intimacy of it was a new kind of agony. He could feel every breath she took, every tremor that ran through her. He worked. It was all he knew. He fixed the roof with pine boughs and mud. He rebuilt the chimney, stone by painful stone, until it would draw. He hunted. He was a good hunter, patient and silent. He brought back a young buck, They ate. The meat and the warmth brought Clara back to life. But it was a new Clara. The girl who teased, the girl who ran, the girl who cried. They were all gone. This one was quiet. She was a shadow, efficient and silent. She took the skinning knife, the one he had sharpened, and she dressed the rest of the deer. Her hands were not clumsy. She worked with a grim, practiced focus. "Gideon taught us to be useful," she said, her voice flat, not looking at him. "He ran the butchery as well. Nothing wasted. He said we were all God's creatures." They lived off salted venison and melted snow. He had brought the small pot from his saddlebag, and it became the center of their lives. They boiled the snow. They boiled the meat. They boiled the bitter roots she dug from the frozen ground. A week passed. Then another. The world shrank to the fore. Damp stone walls of the shack. The wind howled outside. A constant, lonely sermon. They were two people on the moon. The long nights were the worst. The fire was the only light, the only sound. They sat, him on the one rickety stool he had built, her on the floor, staring into the flames. The silence stretched. It was not the comfortable silence of the ranch. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. He found he could not bear it. He found, to his own astonishment, that he missed her voice, even the sharp, teasing one. He cleared his throat. It sounded like stones grinding. "The wood is damp." She looked at him. "It's pine. It's all we have." He tried again. "We need more, before the real snow hits." "Yes." He looked at his hands, at the calluses, the scars. He felt stupid. He was a man who could kill, who could run, who could survive, but he could not speak. "I'm not used to this," he said, the words pulling from him, rough and painful. She waited. "Talking," he said, angry at himself. "It's been 10 years, alone. You talk to a horse, you curse at the cattle. But it's not words, it's just noise." He looked at her, his eyes raw in the firelight. "I think I've forgotten how to speak, without it sounding like a growl, without it sounding like I'm giving an order or chasing something off." He looked down, ashamed. "I'm sorry for how I am." She was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. "Don't be," she said. Her voice so soft he had to lean to hear it. "A growl is honest. I think I prefer it to sweetness." She stared into the flames, her face illuminated, all the hardness gone, leaving only a deep, weary sadness. Gideon was all sweet words. He called me his ward, his child. He spoke like honey. He quoted the scripture. And all of it was a lie. All of it was a trap. The world is full of men who talk pretty while they're set in a snare. She took a deep, shuddering breath. He knew she was going to speak of it. The thing that lay between them, unspoken. "That night," she said, her voice a whisper. "At the ranch, after I said what I said." He stiffened. "Clara, you don't have to." "Yes," she said, her voice gaining a thread of steel. "Yes, I do. Or you'll always see that person, that creature. You need to know." She turned to him, her eyes dark, but not with fear, with a terrible clarity. "I did that," she said. "I said things like that, a lot. I learned it. It was a game." "A game," he repeated, the word tasting bitter. "When you have nothing," she said, her voice low and intense. "When you are nothing, when you're just a piece of property that can be bought or sold or used, you find any power you can. You find the one thing that makes them flinch, the one thing that makes them weak." "What thing?" "Their own guilt," she said, and her smile was a cold, heartbreaking thing. "Men, they all have it. About women, about sin. They're terrified of it, and they're drawn to it. I learned that. I learned to play the part, the whore, the innocent. Whichever one would stop them, whichever one would make them scared, scared of what they were thinking, scared of what they wanted to do." Her voice cracked. "It was a joke. It was always a joke. But it was the only weapon I had. It was the only way I could feel. For 1 second, like I was the one holding the knife. The only time I had any control, I made them afraid of me. She looked down, and the tears that came were silent, hot, and easy. I'm so tired of that joke. Wyatt, I'm so tired of that weapon. It's a bitter, ugly thing, and it's the only thing that kept me alive. He had no words, he who had just admitted he had none. He knelt in front of her. He did not touch her. He just knelt, his heart a raw, open wound. You're not that person, he said, his voice a rasp. Aren't I? She wept. I used it on you. The one man who... You're not that person, he said again. And this time, he did touch her. He put his hand on her hair. You're just tired. We're both just tired of running. The confession changed the air. The next morning, when they woke, the shack was still cold, but the heavy silence was gone. They were just two people, scarred, hiding, but real. He went to hunt, and when he came back, she was gone. He panicked. A hot animal fear shot through him. She had run again. Clara, he roared, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. Here, her voice was small. She was 20 yards away, by the south wall of the shack, the only place the autumn sun had any warmth. She was on her knees, digging in the hard, frozen dirt with his skinning knife. What are you doing? He asked, his heart still hammering. She looked up, and she was smiling. A real smile. It was the first one he had ever seen. It transformed her. Look, she said. She pointed. In a small crack in the rock, a tiny, tough cluster of blue flowers was blooming, defying the frost. Alpine forget-me-nots. They're still here, she said, as if it were a miracle. Even up here, even in the cold. She was carefully, gently digging them up, one by one, and planting them in a small, crooked line against the ugly stone wall of their shack. It needs something, she said, her hands covered in mud. Not just gray. It needs to know we're here. He stood there, his rifle in one hand, a dead rabbit in the other, and watched her plant flowers in the frozen earth. He had thought her strong when she ran, when she joked. He had thought her strong when she broke down the deer. But this was the strongest thing he had ever seen. This was hope, a tiny, stubborn, impossible thing. That night, by the fire, he took out his knife, but he did not sharpen it. He took a piece of the deer bone he had saved, a long, straight piece from the leg. She watched him. He began to carve. He was not a man for small things. His hands were made for reins and axes and the cold steel of a gun. But he worked with a slow, painstaking care. He shaved the bone, thinning it, smoothing it. He worked on it for 3 nights. She finally asked, "What is it?" "Your hair," he said, not looking up. He nodded to her head. "It's always a mess. You keep pulling at it with your fingers." He was carving a hairbrush. He made a long, smooth handle. He took another piece of bone, flattened it, and spent an entire night drilling tiny holes with the tip of his knife. He carved small, wooden pegs, whittling them down until they were as fine as needles, and set them in the holes. It was crude. It was ugly. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever made. He held it out to her. He did not polish it. He did not say a word. She took it. Her hand was trembling. She looked at the rough bone, at the uneven pegs. She looked at him, at his huge, calloused hands, at the killer, the runner, the man who growled. She did not thank him. She simply turned her back to him, sat on the floor, and handed him the brush. He hesitated. He who had broken a man's wrist, who had killed. "Please," she whispered. His hand was shaking. He took the brush. He started at the bottom, at the snarled ends, and he began to brush her hair. It was a slow, careful process. He worked the tangles out, one by one. He was terrified of pulling, terrified of hurting her. It was the hardest work he had ever done. He brushed her hair for a long time, the fire warming their backs. The only sound, the scraping of the bone pegs through her dark hair. A month passed, It was late October. The first real snow had fallen, a light dusting that turned the high country into a world of black rock and white powder. They were healed. They were quiet. They were in this desolate, hidden place, almost at peace. Wyatt was hunting. He was high on a ridge, a mile above the canyon, tracking a small herd of elk. He was patient, his body blending into the rock. The wind was in his favor. He looked down into the valley, scanning the trees, and he saw movement. It was not the elk. It was a horse. And another, and a third. His blood did not run cold. It turned to fire. They were in the valley, a mile below. 3 riders. They were fanned out, moving slowly, their heads down, as if tracking. He knew them. Even from this distance, he knew the broad, thick shoulders of the man whose wrist he had broken. He wore a splint. With him were 2 others. New men, hard-looking. Gideon. The preacher had not given up, denied his property. He had fallen back on his other claim. The bounty. $500. They were not lost. They were hunting. They were hunting him. He did not take the shot at the elk. He did not breathe. He slipped back from the ridge, a shadow in the snow. He ran. He ran back to the shack, his feet sure on the dangerous rock. He burst through the door. Clara dropped the pot. "What is it?" she gasped, seeing his face. "They're here." She did not have to ask who. Her face went white, the blood draining from it. "How many?" "3. The man from the station. And 2 others. They're in the valley. They're tracking us. We have to run," she said, the old instinct taking over. She grabbed a sack. "We can go. Higher. Into the passes. We can lose them." "No." He went to the wall and took down his rifle. He went to the small box where he kept his cartridges. He laid them out on the blanket, one by one. 50, 51. "Wyatt, what are you doing?" she cried. "We can't fight. There are 3 of them. We can go. We can hide." "And then what?" he said. His voice was not angry. It was cold. It was calm. He was a man who had finally stopped. "We freeze in the passes. We run until we starve. We run for another 10 years. And then another." He began to slot the cartridges into the loops of his gun belt. "Wyatt, no, please!" She grabbed his arm, the arm that held the rifle. "Please, don't fight. They will kill you. There are 3 of them. It's me they want. Please, for me." He stopped. He looked at his hand on the rifle. He looked at her hand, pale and small, on his arm. He gently, firmly, removed her hand from his. He set the rifle down. He turned and cupped her face in his hands. "Clara," he said. His voice was not a growl. It was the voice she had never heard, the one he had lost. It was clear and firm, and full of a sadness that broke her heart. "I have made exactly 2 choices in my whole damn life. I shot a man, and I ran. One was stupid, the other was cowardly." He kissed her forehead, a long, firm press. "I'm not running," he said. "Not from this." "But you'll die." She wept, her hands clutching his shirt. "It's not worth it. I'm not worth it." "Let me be the judge of that." He stepped back. He picked up the rifle. He checked the pistol in his holster. He was not a rancher. He was not a fugitive. He was what he had always been. Under it all. A man who was fast with a gun. He looked at her face, streaked with new tears. He looked at the tiny, frozen wildflowers she had planted by the door. "This is my choice," he said. "He's not hunting you, Clara. He's hunting me, and I'm tired of running." He smiled, a small, grim smile. "Let me choose something good. For once." He did not ride back to the settlement. Not at first. He rode down from the high, cold rock, back into the world of air and trees. He found a stream, washed the mountain from his skin, and drank. He was not a fugitive. He was a man with a destination. He rode for 2 days, bypassing Trinidad, cutting east, back toward the small, muddy settlement that had turned her away. He rode into town on a bright, cold November morning. The sky was a pale, high blue, and the mud from the flood had finally hardened into rutted, frozen earth. He rode his mare down the center of the main street. He looked like death. He was thin, his face covered in a rough beard. His eyes sunk deep, but the gun on his hip was clean, and his back was straight. People stopped. Jed Miller, loading a wagon at the general store, froze, his hand halfway to the sack. Mrs. Pierce, the boarding house owner, was sweeping her porch. The broom stilled. They saw him. They recognized the man who had come to town with the survivors. They saw the rifle in his saddle scabbard. They saw the look in his eyes. He was not the reclusive rancher anymore. He knew where to find Gideon. A man like that feeds on an audience. He tied his horse outside the saloon. He did not go in the front. He walked around back, to the small office where the real business was done. He kicked the door open. Gideon was there. He was sitting at a small table, a glass of whiskey in his hand, a ledger open in front of him. The man with the broken wrist and the splint was standing by the window. The other man, the one Wyatt had nearly killed, was gone. Gideon looked up, his thin lips pulling back in a smile, not of surprise, of satisfaction. "Mr. Stone, I knew my men would flush you out. You saved me a long ride, and the price of 2 horses. They didn't find me," Wyatt said. He stepped into the room. His hand was not on his gun. He was calm. "I came for you." The man with the splint moved, his good hand reaching for his pistol. "Don't," Wyatt said, his voice quiet. He did not look at the hired man. He looked at Gideon. "I will kill him, but I will kill you first." The man with the splint hesitated, his hand hovering. "Stand down, Elias," Gideon said, waving his glass. "He is a violent man, but he is also a foolish one. He has come to his own execution." Gideon took a sip of whiskey. "So, you wish to bargain for the girl? It is too late. The bounty on your head is $500. The girl is worthless. I've already sent a wire to the marshal in Santa Fe. They know you are here." Wyatt walked to the table. He reached inside his coat. Elias tensed, but Wyatt did not pull a gun. He pulled a sheaf of papers. They were worn, folded. Clara's forged travel warrants. He slammed them on the table, on top of Gideon's ledger. "These," Wyatt said, his voice low, "are her freedom, made by her own hand." Gideon glanced at them, confused. Then Wyatt reached into his coat again. He pulled a second document. This one was fresher. He had taken it from the sheriff's desk in Trinidad, after Gideon had been arrested for fraud. It was the official telegraph, the one declaring the House of Mercy a criminal enterprise. He slammed it down. "And this," he said, "is your sin." Gideon's face went pale. "You're not a preacher," Wyatt said, his voice filling the small, dark room. "You're a slaver. You run women. You sell children. You came here hunting a girl you branded and tried to sell for $300. Lies!" Gideon hissed, standing up, the chair scraping. "Slander from a ruined woman." "Is it?" Wyatt said. He grabbed the front of Gideon's black coat, bunching it in his fist. He hauled him from the chair and dragged him out of the office, into the main room of the saloon. The midday drinkers, the card players, they all stopped. "This man," Wyatt roared, shoving Gideon into the center of the room, "is a fraud." Elias, the hired man, ran after them, his pistol finally drawn. "Back away, Stone!" Wyatt ignored him. He was a man possessed, not by rage, but by a cold, righteous fire. He shoved Gideon through the swinging doors, out onto the street. Gideon stumbled and fell into the frozen mud. "This man," Wyatt bellowed, his voice echoing off the false fronts of the buildings, "told you he was a man of God. People were coming. Jed Miller, Mrs. Pierce, the blacksmith, the telegraph operator." A small crowd gathered. "He came here hunting a girl," Wyatt shouted, pointing at Gideon, who was scrambling to his feet, his black suit filthy. "A girl you all turned away." He looked at Mrs. Pierce. "You called her unclean. You wouldn't give her a room." He looked at Jed. "You left her in a storm. She had a reputation," Mrs. Pierce cried, her face red. "She had a master," Wyatt roared back. "This man, he didn't come here for justice. He came for his property. He branded her. He tried to marry her to a man old enough to be her grandfather." He stepped toward Gideon. Elias raised his pistol. "That's far enough." Wyatt kept walking. "He's not a preacher. He's a trafficker. He ran a house in Albuquerque where he sold girls. He sold them. You hear me? And when she ran, he came here and used the law. He used you." Gideon's face was a mask of pure, white-hot hatred. His reputation was ruined. His power was gone. He had been exposed. In front of the very people he had fooled. He was a dead man. "You are a liar!" Gideon shrieked, his voice a high, thin wail. "You are a killer, a murderer!" He clawed inside his black coat. He was not going for a paper. He was going for a pistol, a small derringer. Wyatt had been waiting for it. Gideon's hand came out. He was fast. Wyatt was faster. His Colt was in his hand. The shot was deafening in the cold air. It was not a boom. It was a crack. Gideon screamed and grabbed his right hand. The derringer fell into the mud. Blood poured from Gideon's palm. Wyatt had not killed him. He had shot the gun from his hand, shattering the bones. It was a deliberate, precise, and terrible wound. He had disarmed him, permanently. Wyatt stood, the smoke clearing from his pistol, his arm steady. Elias, the hired man, looked at his boss, bleeding in the dirt. He looked at Wyatt, a man who could make that shot. He looked at the faces of the townsfolk, who were staring at Gideon with a new, dawning horror. Elias lowered his pistol. He dropped it. He turned and walked, fast, to his horse, and rode out of town. He wanted no part of this. Into the silence. A new sound came, the jingle of spurs. Sheriff Potts, the town's part-time lawman, walked into the square. He had his shotgun in his hands. He had heard the shot, but he had also heard the whole speech from his office window. He looked at Gideon, who was weeping now, a pathetic, sobbing mess in the mud, clutching his ruined hand. He looked at Wyatt, who had not moved, who had not tried to run. Wyatt raised his pistol, flipped it, and offered it to the sheriff. "But first." "Sheriff," Wyatt said, his voice calm. "My name is Wyatt Stone. I am wanted in Laramie, Wyoming, for the killing of a man named Bigelow. It was 10 years ago. I'm done running." Sheriff Potts took the gun. He looked at it. He looked at Wyatt. The entire town was watching. Jed Miller stepped forward. "Sheriff, this man, Wyatt, he just told the truth. That preacher is a fraud. We were wrong. We turned that girl away. Wyatt took her in. He protected her." "Mrs. Pierce nodded, her face pale. "He's right. Sheriff, Gideon, he's a monster. Wyatt saved us from him. He saved that girl." The sheriff looked at Gideon, then back at Wyatt. He sighed, a long, tired sound. He was a rancher, not a lawman, not really. He hated paperwork. He hated hangings even more. He looked at Wyatt, at the deep lines of 10 hard years on the run. "Laramie," the sheriff said, "is a long way from here. That's Wyoming territory. We're in Colorado. The wire is a tricky thing. Paperwork gets lost." He uncocked his shotgun. He walked over to Gideon and kicked the derringer away. He looked down at the bleeding man. "But I do have a warrant for this man, from Trinidad, for fraud, and now, for attempted murder. I saw him draw." He nudged Gideon with his boot. "Get up. You're going to Denver. You'll be lucky if they don't hang you for what you did to that girl." He handcuffed Gideon, who was wailing about his hand. Then the sheriff turned back to Wyatt. He handed him his Colt. Wyatt just looked at it. "Mr. Stone," the sheriff said, his voice quiet. "You've been living on that high ranch of yours for 4 years now. Never caused a bit of trouble. Been a good neighbor, far as I can tell. Quiet. I killed a man." "Sheriff," Wyatt said, "you protected a friend." Jed Miller corrected. "And you just protected a whole town," the sheriff said, "from a different kind of killer." He pushed the pistol into Wyatt's hand. "As far as I'm concerned, Laramie is a ghost story. You've paid more than enough, son, for all of it." The sheriff looked up at the mountains. "Your ranch is a long, cold ride, and it looks like another storm is building. I'd start now, and I'd plan on staying there. It's safer for everyone." Wyatt looked at his gun. He looked at the townsfolk. their faces no longer hard, but filled with a shame he understood. He nodded. He holstered his pistol, went to his horse, and rode away, back to the silence of his ranch. Weeks later, the snow was deep. Wyatt was chopping wood, his breath a cloud in the cold air. When the wagon appeared, it was Jed Miller, and next to him, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, was Clara. Wyatt dropped the axe. She slid from the wagon. She was not the girl in the blue dress, or the girl in his old shirt. She wore a simple, gray wool dress. She looked older. She looked tired, but she was standing straight. "The trial," she said, her voice clear in the cold. "It's in 2 days, at the settlement. A circuit judge is coming. The marshal from Santa Fe, he wants me to testify against Gideon." Wyatt said nothing. He just looked at her. "I'm not afraid," she said, "but I don't want to go alone. Will you come with me?" The settlement's main hall was packed. It was cold, but the room was hot with the breath of half the county. Gideon was there, sitting at a table with a lawyer. His arm was in a sling, his face gray and bitter. Clara walked to the front. She was asked to swear on the Bible. She put her left hand on it, the one with the scar. The prosecutor began. "Please state your name." "My name is Clara Duval." "And how long were you acquainted with the defendant?" "Mr. Gideon?" Clara looked at Gideon. He stared back, his eyes full of venom. The old Clara would have flinched. The old Clara would have made a joke. She turned to the judge. Her voice was not loud, but it filled the room. It was steady. It was clear. "I was his property from the time I was 10, she said. And she told them everything. She told them about the House of Mercy, about the endless work, the cold, the hunger. She told them about the punishments. She told them about the stove lid. She held up her hand, the small, round, puckered scar on her knuckle. "He did this," she said, "when I stole a book." She told them about the rancher. She told them about the $300 sale. She told them about the forged papers, about running, about the terror. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply spoke the truth. It was a cold, hard, unvarnished thing. Wyatt stood at the back of the room. He had not taken a seat. He watched her. He had never seen anything so brave in all his life. When she finished, the room was so quiet. He could hear the sound of the snow melting from the roof. The judge sentenced Gideon to 30 years at the territorial prison for kidnapping, fraud, and unlawful servitude. He then looked at Clara. "Miss Duval, your testimony has been courageous. This court finds that all claims against you are false. You are free. Your name is cleared. You are free to go." Clara stood there for a moment. She closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. Then she turned, walked down the aisle, past Mrs. Pierce, past Jed Miller. She walked to the back of the room, to the man standing in the shadows. She put her hand in his, and they walked out into the bright, clean snow. The story ends back at the ranch. It is spring. The world is green, the creek is low and clear, and the mud is just earth again. Wyatt is mending the same fence line he was mending when he first heard the stagecoach. The scars on his hands are covered in fresh dirt. Clara walks from the cabin. It is a home now. There are curtains in the windows, made from flour sacks. The wildflowers she planted in the mountains are growing in a small, fierce patch by the porch. She is carrying a tin cup of water. He takes it from her, drinks. He is older. The lines around his eyes are deeper, but the hardness is gone. He is at peace. She is, too. Her hair is tied back, and her face has color. Her body a new, healthy strength. They are scarred. They are quiet, but they are free. That night, they sit by the fire. The buffalo hide is on the floor. He is reading a newspaper. She is sitting on the floor, brushing her hair with the crude bone brush he made her. She stops. She looks at her reflection in the dark window. "Wyatt," she whispers. He lowers the paper. "It still hurts sometimes," she says. Not her hand, not her feet. She just hurts. He puts the paper down. He goes to her. He kneels behind her. He takes the brush from her hand. He kisses her shoulder. right on the bone, just where the wool of her nightgown sits. Then we'll be gentle, he replies, his voice a low, sure promise. Every time. Thank you for listening to this story. We really hope you enjoyed it. This is a new channel, and we'd love to build a community. Please let us know where in the world you're listening from. If you like this, please consider subscribing to From Wild West, and we'd be grateful if you'd share your thoughts on the story. What parts stayed with you? We read all the comments, and your feedback in English helps us know what kind of stories you want to hear next.